Hello Steelers, and welcome to this review of Quartermaster General East Front. This is the latest of the Quartermaster General game titles that has been produced, written by Ian Brodie. It's a fast-paced World War II strategy game. This, as I say, is the brand new one. This was only just released at the Essence Spiel. My friend Paul has lent me this specifically for this review because we played it the other day and I thoroughly enjoyed it, as I do with all the Quartermaster General games. And he got it from his friend who was over at the Essence Spiel. When I'm recording this, I don't know if it has been released yet, but it might. I think the general release is definitely is pretty much imminent. And I'm going to start this review by saying I definitely thoroughly recommend this game. However, I'm going to tell you why I thoroughly recommend it, and also what the difference is between this and the previous sets of the Quartermaster General games. And as I say, I've been a fan of these really since I bought the first one, which is Quartermaster General World War II. This was first produced 2014. This is still available. There's a couple of expansions for this. I never got them, the aircraft and things like that you can include into them. But then this was then very quickly followed, and I'm a very big fan of Quartermaster General for Second World War. It was then very quickly followed in 2015, I believe, by Victory or Death. This came from the Plastic Soldier Company, and this is a Greek, ancient Greek version of the similar kind of game. This, I would say, is my least favourite, simply because I don't know the period. And I think it helps if you have a little bit of background knowledge in the periods that these games cover. This one, as I say, I have very little knowledge in the Greek period. So, to me, that was probably my least favourite of the games. I've played it, but, you know, it's not something I've rushed back to. One of my other favourites is the 1914 version. As you can see, I'm a big fan of the Quartermaster General. This was 2016, again produced by Plastic Soldier Company. They still produce this. I think actually there has been a revamped version of this. I don't think they've done anything with the rules, but they have just changed a few things, cleaned up a few bits and pieces here and there, just slightly different. I can't remember who it is that publishes it, but it is still out there. And then finally, until this one, is the Cold War version as well. This again is this was produced by Plastic Soldier Company. Again, this was done in 2018, so there's been a hiatus of nearly 5 years between this one, the Cold War, and the East Front. And as I say, I played all of those. I've enjoyed every single one of them, apart from a little bit of the Victory or Death, just because it's a period of history that I know very little about. These are very much narrative games, and this is, and as I say, it does help if you know something of this. So I was incredibly excited when the East Front was announced only a few weeks ago, actually. Just before Spiel. I had no idea it was coming. This one was produced not by Plastic Soldier Company, but this is by Ares Games, who have done things like Wings of Glory and various other games as well. So they were a well-known games designer, producer as well, and this, as I say, this is their latest effort. What's slightly perturbing is that the box is a slightly different shape to the other ones, so you probably couldn't stack them all up together neatly. But that is the least. That is, if that's the main problem, then I think we're doing pretty well already. But this is normally the Quartermaster General games kind of take a whole strategic view. So, for example, Quartermaster General, the original, is the whole of the Second World War. Quartermaster 1914, the whole of the First World War. Quartermaster Cold War, the whole of the Cold War, and they're pretty much across the entire country. The 1914 one is mostly Europe, so it's basically from from Britain all the way through to Russia, or at least halfway through Russia, because, you know, this is where the main fighting of the First World War was taking place with some of Turkey and things. This one, East Front, as you would expect, and as you can see from the map here, covers basically from Berlin all the way up to Stalingrad. So it is literally the Eastern Front of the Second World War, where the Germans and the Soviets were fighting throughout 1941 to 45. And this is when the game starts, because they are all done. Each turn is done in years as well when you score, or at least it's a season within a year, and you have several seasons to go through, several years to go through until spring 1945, when inevitably the war ended anyway, and that's your final scoring round. So the way it works is it's very simple. There's no dice involved in this. It is very much a board game, but it is very quick, and you can play literally the Eastern Front within 2 hours, as we did just recently. And we got a great conclusion. It happened so the Germans pushed all the way into and captured Stalingrad, but then were forced all the way back just to the edges of Berlin. So it was basically followed exactly the fighting on the Eastern Front as it should do. And the way it kind of works is these are also card-driven games. Now the difference here is, the main difference, I'll just tell you about it, is because in the earlier games, because they are card-driven games, there's a lot of card management that goes on. You generally have one deck. In the earlier games, most of them are aimed at either at least 3 players, generally 6. You can play them with 2 players. You can do that quite easily, but the more players that you have, the far easier those games are. We played Quartermaster General for Second World War, for example, as a 2-player game, one taking the Allies, one taking the Axis, of course. However, the problem is then you have 3 countries within each of those groupings, and you have to deal with their cards. And the way that they work is you put cards down as face down, basically as a reaction card later in the game. So you have to remember what cards you put down, who you put them down for, which units you put, which side you've put them down for. So it can get quite confusing. At the club, I have played a lot of 6-player games of Quartermaster General, and that is really when it shines. It is a great game when you have everybody who is in control of a particular army. As these games went on and up to the Cold War, they kind of got less and less of that, and the Cold War is slightly different in that it's a lot easier to play as a 3-player game. And we've kind of arrived here and now with the Eastern Front, which is very much a 2-player game. You have the Germans versus the Soviets, and that's it. You do have the pact, the tripartite pact units, and these are generic units, so that would be the Italians, the Romanians, the Hungarians, the Finnish, and then you also have the Germans, and that's the only separation in the 2. But they are all played through the German side, through the Axis side, so that you don't split the cards into Pact and German. They all come into one. So it is very much a 2-player game, and it works very, very well as a 2-player game. One of the questions I guess you're going to ask is, how does it work? And as I say, it is actually a card-driven game. So you have a hand of cards, you draw from these decks over here. I'll talk about these in a bit more depth in a second. But you basically have a hand of cards, and you play these cards. Now, once again, in the older versions of Quartermaster General, I'm going to keep going back to these because there is a huge difference. In the older ones, you had several different types of cards. So you had an event. You would play that and it would happen. You also had cards which were response cards. You would put them on in front of you, and then when something happened you could respond with it. And then you also had cards which you actually placed face down in front of you as well. This is why it got confusing if you're playing with more than two or more forces on one side. So then you would use that card when its event came up, and you'd have to try and remember what it was. And it's the same with the 1914 one, because there was a lot of planning that went into attacks. You had a lot of cards that were face down that you had to try and remember. Easier when you're only playing one country, much harder when you're playing 2 or 3. In this game, they've really tightened up the card play. So a card, you can use it in a couple of different ways. You have the actual event card, which is the immediate thing that happens here. But you can also use a reaction that is also built into the card itself as well. So for example, let me show you here. So we've got the Mosin Nagant, named 1891 30 rifle. And it says, deploy a Soviet infantry in a space east of the 1939 line, which is one of the lines on the map. The map is divided to 1939 lines and 1941 lines, so you know where you're deploying. And then take another action. And each time you do one of these, this is an action. However, at the bottom here it says exchange, and these are used in defence. So you can actually use this card to, when your opponent is attacking you, to exchange a piece for a piece. So even if you lose one, they lose one as well. And there's a few other things as well. There's stuff like stand fast, that kind of thing. What else? We've got anti-aircraft as well, and advance. And these happen at different points. So the cards themselves are actually built in, so you're not placing cards down in front of you. So you don't have to remember things, you can just play them straight from your hand. Now, the way that it works is you start with a mid-war deck, which you've got here. It's marked up here, it says mid. And what is very nice as well for new players, if you don't want to, you actually have a hand. You start with a hand of 7 and you're supposed to draw them from the mid deck. You can also take these cards, these 7 cards, which basically is like an easy start, and both sides have them, the Germans and the Soviets. So for example, the rifle is in there, dig in for border guards, women volunteers, Molotov cocktails, Stavka, and the Black Sea Fleet. So these are cards that are to help you get into action pretty quickly and also guide you in a kind of historical way, because these are also historical events as well that happened. That's the flavour of the cards. You can, if you wanted to, if you're an experienced player, shuffle all your mid cards together and then just draw 7 and play with those from the start, and that is, again, you know, it just adds a little bit more tension and friction to it. Later in the game, when you get to spring of 1942, or actually after the scoring round of winter 41, you then put in the late cards, and then you have this deck of cards, which is much bigger, and these then go into the existing pile that you have, shuffle them together, and then you start drawing those, and these are late cards. So for example, let me just give you an example here of the Soviet Union ones. You've got Breakthrough Artillery Divisions, Tito leads Yugoslav Resistance, Heroes of the Soviet Union, Forward, and as I say, these the flavours of the cards is all about, you know, as it's going on, the war is going on, and on and on. Now you play cards to place units. The other thing as well is you can actually use cards as well. You don't just have to use them for the action here. There are other actions you can do. So you can play 2 cards for a desperate attack. You can play a card to deploy an infantry, 2 cards to deploy a tank, or an aircraft piece, for example, or a fleet. And so you've got all it's all basically based around the cards and how the cards are interacting. Now the problem here is you only have a finite amount of cards, and that is these cards here in your deck. Once you are drawing cards at the end of your turn, you either draw up to 3 cards or up to 5 cards in your hand. So if you have less than 5 cards in your hand, you draw until you hit 5. If you have less than that, you will draw until you stop at 3, whichever happens first. So you are always going through the cards. To attack, you have to use cards. To defend, you have to use cards. To deploy, you have to use cards. So you are continually using your deck, and you will, by the end of the turn or by the end of the game, you will be down to your last few cards depending on how you've played them. And in our game, our recent game, I used up 5 cards just to attack a Soviet area and then capture it. It was quite an expensive attack. And it cost me quite a lot in men as well, because you will lose units as you're attacking. And this was, so that was, you know, this is something that is relatively unsustainable. I got to a point where it was about halfway through the war, and I was getting no cards for actual deployment. I could have been spending cards to deploy, but I was trying my best to keep pushing forward. And basically the fight had gone out to my deck at that point. So it was, you know, a case of you're trying to manage resources whilst also defending as well, and still on these cards. So the other thing that you also have as well are these things. These are called the Contingency Cards, and you have 5 of them, and both sides have 5. So I'll give you an example here. The Soviet ones, they have pre-war doctrine, Sharaft-Bats, Gulag economy, increased aid from the West, and also river flotillas. Now these cards are actually double-sided. So you have an initial side, the ones I just read out, and then you flip them over and they have a second side. So when you use the action on these, you flip it over, and then when you use the action again on the second side, you discard it. So you have 4 of these, so these are basically 10 actions that you can take, but they are called contingencies because they are pretty desperate. We weren't using these until at least, again, halfway through, and that's probably the time to be doing it. So for example, let me just show you. The Gulag economy, the Axis gain 1 victory point, and you draw 3 cards. So basically you're getting 3 cards into your hand, but then once that's used up, it's gone. Flip it over, and then the next thing you can use is the other one. The second side is generally not as good as the initial side, because obviously this is showing desperation as the war wears on. So you're not getting as great a deal from your second use of these, and then once they're gone as well. But they do kind of give you like 10 extra cards in your hand that you start. And the Germans also have some as well over there. So the 2 decks are built pretty similarly. And as I say, these are, they're very flavoursome for the Second World War and for the Eastern Front in particular, for what you can do. The game is just won on victory points. Whoever has the most victory points at the end of the game wins. You gain victory points by taking the starred areas in your enemy's territory, and you can also gain victory points by playing cards. If one side is, during the scoring phase, 10 points or more ahead of the enemy, then they automatically win. So there is a cut-off as well. And as I say, we played, I think, for about 2.5 hours. We'd never played this before, and we soon picked it up within about 2 or 3 turns. We knew what we were doing. One thing I would probably say is this deserves probably replaying, simply because you probably want to get to know the deck at least pretty well, so you kind of know what's gone and what's coming up, and you know what to expect. But you can probably guess most of these things are, attack cards, deploy cards, various actions that happen in the Eastern Front. For example, I think Kiev was burnt to the ground during our game, unfortunately for Kiev. But as I say, it encompasses the Eastern Front very well, I think, in a board game, and it is a board game. It is a game. This is not a simulation by any means, by any stretch of the imagination, but it is very much a board game, a fast-paced board game that gives you a great amount of flavour for that period. I did mention it before. I mean, the ones that I enjoyed the least of the Quartermaster games is Victory and Death, because of my lack of knowledge of the period. That doesn't detract from the game or the gameplay itself. That was simply just me not really knowing the period. I think if I went back to it and played it quite a few more times, then I would probably again pick up pretty quickly what was happening with it. And I think this is the same with this. Don't think of that as a barrier to any kind of entry into this game. Very simple, very easy to get into, and very quick paced and fast paced, and very strategic as well. There's a lot of thought into where you attack, where you push your forces in, where you're going to manage those resources that you've got. And as I say, our game, it looked as though the Soviets had been rolled over in the first few turns, then all of a sudden it switched on a dime like it did in the Second World War, and there was, all of a sudden I was playing the Germans, I was completely faced with hordes of Soviet soldiers bearing down on Berlin, and it went from literally from a high all the way down to me pushing non-existent units around on the map. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant game. As I say, I don't think I can recommend this any more than this. I think this is a terrific game in the family of the Quartermaster series. I expect that they're probably already working on new versions of this, and I would be very surprised if there isn't a Normandy one of these that will come out at some point, possibly even a Pacific one as well, which would be also interesting. I mean, Eastern Front is probably quite an obvious one given the scale of it, whereas a Normandy one would be even more microscoped in on northern France, but it would still work as a game like that. And I mean, I've got no prior knowledge whatsoever, but I would happily put money on there being a Normandy version of this at some point. It looks great as well. The artwork on all of the cards is fantastic. You get these lovely little wooden pieces as well, so you've got infantry, aircraft, tanks and ships. I'm not going to tell you too much about the actual rules themselves, because there isn't really a great deal of point. You can work that out when you get it. It's I'm talking about this in general terms really, and just how the cards themselves work. And I think it does work very well. Really fast paced. As I say, we had got it down pat pretty quickly within about 2 or 3 turns, going completely cold. Even though Paul was showing us how to play, it was very simple. So yeah, so there's quite a lot of depth to it, even though it may seem pretty simple from the first look. It is very much a tactical card play with a strategic overview of the Eastern Front, and I will say I will give this definitely 10 out of 10. Once it has been released, whenever that is, I would say definitely get it, get a mate, sit down and play it, and have a good few games of it. Don't think you'll regret it. This comes thoroughly recommended from Storm of Steel, and as I say, I haven't been paid a promotion for this game. This was lent to me by Paul, and I am going to buy it. I was going to buy it anyway, but I'm definitely going to buy it since I've played it against decks. I'll wrap up there. I will say thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this review, then please do hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. About 80% of my viewers haven't done, so please do if you've made it this far. And also check out the Patreon and also channel memberships, and you will help out making more videos for Storm of Steel Wargaming. And I will see you in the next video.